Bibles, go ahead and turn them to Ephesians chapter 6. Last week we began a series simply entitled War, and my objective as any good leader is to lay out in front of us the whole scope of the war that we fight, the battlefields and its terrain, the enemy and its tactics, or their tactics, and the resources at our disposal, and how we must use those resources to not only defend the keep, as it were, but to take ground and to expand the kingdom. Because we are not only here to sit and to exist, but we are to win the lost, to expand the ground and to take it back from the enemy. And to kick off last week, we read about how Nehemiah and the builders of Jerusalem were vigilant in what they were doing there in Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 17, where it says, "Those who built on the wall and those who carried burdens loaded themselves so that with one hand they worked at construction and with the other they held a weapon." And in this we comprehend our task with this simple phrase, that we must build with sword in hand. And that's essentially the entire push of this series, because we came out of our first series of building a church that's meant for real life, for doing things outside the walls, that we're actually living out the commandments of God, even though they are difficult in our life. And to build a church that's going to be here for generations to come, which is how we kicked off that entire series. But in order to build for generations, we must build with sword in hand, because as soon as we begin to do what God's called us to do, the enemy will begin to resist. Satan does not care if the doors of a church remain open, as long as our ears are dull, our hearts are hard, and we're only focused on existence rather than resistance against the enemy that stands against us. And we are to wake up and to focus on our task at hand, on the war, and remind ourselves that we must build, as I said, with sword in hand. There in Ephesians chapter 6, where you should be, we read a little bit of that last week. And as you finish turning there, I'm going to read a small excerpt from 1 John in preparation for what we're going to talk about today. He says, "Do not love the world, neither the things that are in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in this world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world." And he continues and says, "The world is passing away, and the lust or desires of it. But he who does the will of God abides forever." If we are going to build something that stands the test of time, as we discussed when I first got here, then we must build with sword in hand. Now, there's a lot in this section in 1 John that we can unpack, but we're going to be in Ephesians, as I said. There's one word in 1 John I want to bring out to kind of help us understand where we're at in this war. Because last week we talked about the enemy number one, which was Satan himself, the roaring lion who's running around seeking who he can devour. Well, today we're going to look at the second tier of these enemies. And one thing in this section in 1 John, one word, is the word world. It says we are not to love the world. Now, as good Christians, this may sound against what we understand, because we are called to love others like Jesus did, and even to love our enemies. And certainly our enemies are of the world, in the world. And we are to love people, and maybe that sounds a little off when we read it. But the word world there in John, and throughout most of the New Testament, is the Greek word cosmos, or cosmos, which means order or arrangement, or things, how something is put together, and by extension, adornment. It's where we get the word cosmetology from today, because it is an orderly arrangement of how something is put together. And cosmetology is the study and the practice of setting certain things a certain way, whether it's jewelry, whether it's makeup, whatever it might be, or hair. It is done according to a certain order for a certain intent. In other words, it is a system that is supposed to either make a bold statement about who you are, or to mute something about you don't like. And we use these words. It's the idea of a system. And John here warns that the world system, which is anytime you read the word world, that's what it is describing for us. It is a system of how the world runs and how it works. And John gives us a little bit of insight before we get to Ephesians by saying that this world system, this arrangement that we are stuck inside of, that we are warring against, runs on three basic lusts or desires, which is the lust of the eyes, the lust of my flesh, and the pride of life. And everywhere we look today in media, you see these lusts portrayed in one way, shape, form, or another. And all of them are portrayed to us as being something that we should want or that they are okay. We're told that our violence is justified, and we watch movies that are full of those things. We watch shows that are full of adultery or fornication or lies or intentions that are not right. And the more we watch those things, the more we give in to the idea that that is how things just are, and that's how we should be, that's how we should act and live and learn and run our lives. And the more we give to those things, the more we lose. And it's clear to anyone who pays attention that there is a degenerate undercurrent to society today in all that it tries to do and convince us of. It tries to convince us that what we see and desire or feel is right if it's right for us. That is really the philosophy of our society today. The philosophy that says, and this is Aleister Crowley who first coined this, the precursor to Anton LaVey, which if you don't know that, is the founder of the Satanic Church out in California. But he's quoted as saying, the whole law is do as thou wilt. And though the majority of people wrapped up in the world today would not say that they are part of Satan's church or his organization or his society, they do live by that law. Do as you want, and people will say, do as you want without hurting, as long as it doesn't hurt others, and yet that is never the case. People are often hurting others, and usually this happens where that they are doing what they want at expense of others. Colossians 1:13, as the NASB puts it, it says, God rescued us from the domain of darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of his beloved Son. And so whether you like it or not, we as Christians have left one world and entered into another. And the old world does not like that fact. Neither does our enemy, as we saw last week, Satan. And we could be forgiven for thinking that our first enemy, the devil, is the only one to blame for all those things we just listed. But we would be wrong. So we want to look at Ephesians chapter 6. And we're going to talk about the world system and what it runs on and how it is affected in our lives and where it comes from, because we want to know what these enemies are. If I'm going to fight a war, I need to know, as we looked last week, who I am and who my enemy is. If I know my enemy, I know myself, I need not fear 100 battles, it says. If I don't know the enemy, but I know myself, for every win I will get a loss, it said. But if I know neither the enemy nor myself, I will suffer loss in every encounter, is what Sun Tzu in his quintessential book, The Art of War, lists out for us. So we need to know both. We don't need me, I need to know him, but I also need to know all my enemies, and part of it is the world system that has been set up. So look at Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10. We read this part of this last week. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you might be able to stand against the wiles or the methods, the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle, is what we looked at last week, against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. I think by reading that little excerpt, you can tell the Apostle Paul wants us to do one thing, and that's to take a stand. He uses the word stand or withstand or take a stand several times. He wants us to be able to stand in the fray, in the war, in the battle, when the noise and sounds and raids of war are going on, and still keep our heads. Because as we said in our third message, I believe last in June, it is the army whose ranks remain cohesive through the battle that wins. It's the ones that stick together. Because, as we saw last week, division is one of the most potent weapons an enemy can do. In fact, in the battle we referenced in Philippi, in our third message last in June, we learned that the victory was given to the triumvirs because they split Brutus and Cassius's army in half, and they were not able to communicate, or they did not communicate well. And when you divide in half, it's much easier to win. One of the most basic principles of war is divide and conquer, because you can always deal with a smaller force easier than you can with a bigger force. It's pretty sincere, pretty basic logic. But what we find here is that we're not only in a battle, but we are in a battle against a system or a structure, a cosmos of evil that goes well beyond just Satan himself. And this morning we'll discuss quickly why that's the case. And number one, the true nature of our warfare. As we read last week in verse 12, the word wrestling, pale in Greek, means a contrast or a contest between two opponents who are attempting to throw the other, and this is an ancient wrestling term, and the end of the match was not pinning someone's shoulders to the ground, but it ended when an opponent had his opponent by the throat on the ground. It was mortal combat. It was to destroy or to completely pacify the enemy. And then the word against, which is used 5 times in that one verse. We are against the principalities, against powers, against rulers, against spiritual wickedness in high places. We are against all these things. There in verse 11 again, against the wiles of the devil. And that word against means to be face to face with somebody to the finish. A boxing match. A sword, like a sword fight. It's you and that person, and you're locked in until somebody dies. And that's the pictures that Paul's using here to describe the war that we're in. And we said that this describes our war as very real, visceral combat. And if we're not vigilant, then we will be on the losing end of this war. And we do not need to be that. And though we know that Christ has won our ultimate victory at the end of the day, each one of us individually have a life that needs to survive walking the path of righteousness, as we looked this morning, so that we can affect those people who are outside that path and bring them in. And so I need to win my fight, not just for me personally, but so I can win other people to the path and to the war, and so that I can bolster the ranks of the kingdom of heaven against this system that the Satan has set up, right? So it's not just about me, but it's about people who are on their way to hell, as we talked about in the first series. They're on their way to a big loss. And if we are caught up in divisions within our ranks, or weakness, or failure to serve and be counted when we are called upon, then we will lose. The church itself will lose if we do not remain cohesive. And so we talked about that quite a few times. It is not against flesh and blood, which is a Hebraism or a Hebrew saying, which means it is not a physical fight. It is not fought with bombs and grenades and bullets. We do not fight this war with bayonets and bombs against ranks of men hidden within walled cities. And Paul expands this in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 4. It says, the weapons of our warfare are not carnal. And the word carnal, we use it only ever in the negative sense, but the simple sense of it, it simply means physical. That's all it means. The word carnal means physical. It means of this world. It means this is a carnal object. It exists. I can pick it up, and well, I don't know if I can pick it up. Yeah, I guess I could. But I can pick it up and I can move it if I wanted to. But it's something I can touch and feel and I can affect here with my strength, with my physical ability. But the war we fight is not affected by swords or bullets or bombs or my strength, physically speaking. My weapons, the weapons of our warfare, are not carnal. They're not of the flesh. They're not physical, but they are mighty in God, he says. They are powerful. So our enemies are spiritual. They are, and so are our weapons. Our weapons are powerful because our enemy, though spiritual, is more powerful than the hordes of men that they affect. So we do understand, and we'll get into this in our time, we do understand that this system, these evil spirits we'll look at, and the men that they control do control much of the world, and they cause the wars and the problems we have, and sometimes it does require us to stand against them in physical ways, to defend our families against evil, or even our country at times. Those things may become necessary, but they are not the end of that fight. What is behind them, the kingdom, the system that exists behind the curtain, as it were, is the true enemy. So that's a true nature of our warfare. Number two, the true scope of our enemies. Half of believers' issues today in a culture of science and what is seen is that they they claim to believe in God and angels, devils, and spirits, but they don't often act like those are real-life threats. That somehow the spiritual world is ethereal, that it's less than real, that it's kind of this thing that it's good, it sounds good, but it doesn't really affect my life down here. I just go to church because it's a good thing to do. It sounds good. I check the box. It looks good. And it's good for society because we can learn morals, and that's all there really is. And it kind of, if you go to the far extent of that belief, it begins to teach that Jesus is just a good teacher, that he's a good person to follow and a good manager of his intents and all that kind of stuff. But we know that that's less than what it should be. Yes, Jesus did teach us morals and teach us how to live in this world, but he goes far beyond that. And the other half of believers' problem is that they give the devil far too much credit. And everything that goes wrong in their life is because of the devil. My washing machine broke this week. Well, that's the devil fighting me. I got a flat tire. Well, that's the devil. And the devil this, and the devil that. And the devil's hiding under every bush and every tree and every car and every place you go and every person that you meet. And yet, we need to understand that the devil, though powerful, though he is cunning and seeking whom he may devour, he is an individual scope. He is limited. He is not God. And we need to understand that. When we talk about God, we talk about him being all-knowing. We call it omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent, which means he's all-knowing, he's everywhere, and he has all power. We see God that way, and we know that. And what we do many times is we create a false dichotomy where it's God versus the devil, and somehow the devil's on equal footing with God. And yet, we know that the devil is created by God himself and is lesser than by default. He cannot be everywhere. When you see him talking to God in Job, God asks him, "What have you been doing?" He says, "Well, I've been walking to and fro, up and down." Why? Because he is not everywhere all the time. He is somewhere in one place, and that's where he is. He cannot be elsewhere. He is not God. He is not even like him at all. We say things like, "The devil's tested me today." The devil's been on me. Or, "Today when we're tempted," we say, "Not today, Satan." But if we were to think that the Prince of Darkness himself has sat down at our table, it's one of two things. We're a very powerful individual, or we're doing in one way or the other, either for evil or for good. My dad always put it this way: he's either standing with the one causing the most chaos, or he's standing against the one who has the most power in God, which more than likely is some silent name on their knees somewhere that nobody knows about, right? We know that because we know that the most effective people in the kingdom are not someone like me who gets to stand and to preach. It's usually somebody in a prayer closet somewhere whose name will never be known until we get to heaven. And when we talked about this a little bit in Sunday school, and I posted it this week, when God says the first shall be last and the last first, I truly believe that what that means is that many of the people we think are going to be on these top-tier pedestals are only going to be where they are because there is some unseen person in the background supporting them, praying for them, setting them up for success. That has been the truth of every person I've ever met in my life, which is why I know, and I try to do my best to make an emphasis that we are serving those who serve us, that our volunteers are not somebody to just be used up, because I've been there. I've done for 20 years of my life. I've been in ministry in every facet and every place, and I know that it's usually the person in the background who gets forgotten, whose name's not on a plaque somewhere, who's usually doing the most work. But these things, and the devil is usually resisting someone like that, or he's assisting somebody who's in the background controlling the strings, as everybody says. We have about 100 million and one conspiracy theories about how the world runs. But we do know from what it says here that there is something behind the veil, behind the scene, that is controlling the majority of the world. And it says that Satan is the god of this age, this time. He is the one who has power within this world. And he does not have power over God. He does not have power even over us, as we saw last week, but he can devour us. He can destroy our testimonies and our lives and our families and our children. And that's what we need to defend against. But it's not just him. He has a system, a network, as it were, set up. And so we see that in verse 12 of Ephesians 6. Satan's system's scope is pervasive. He is limited, but his system is not. His system pervades this world. We do not wrestle against flesh and blood. It's not the guy who's screaming at me with all his problems and telling me that I should be for abortion or affirming gender fluidity and all these other things. It's not him. He is not my enemy. The person who's yelling at me and screaming at me and saying these things, though he may be wrapped up in those lies, he, at the end of the day, is not the enemy. It is what behind him is the system that has turned out these people to be a certain way and to teach them. And they honestly are ignorant. They do not know another way. They've been indoctrinated into thinking that this is the way, and if anything stands against that, it's very much a religious idea. Let's put it that way. The society of the world, they don't call themselves a religion, but they function as a religion. This is what you believe, and anybody who stands against that's a heretic, and you have authority to do whatever. And that's what you see. You see today that they will do something against someone who stands against them, whether it's abortion rights or women's rights or gay rights or whatever it might be. You take a stand, and they will do and say just about anything to silence you from that. Because it is not so much an idea as much as it is a religion, but it's a religion of this system. It's not about flesh and blood. It's not physical. I'm not going to go out there and win the fight by punching the guy in the mouth. It doesn't win fights. It doesn't win what we're trying to do here. We're fighting against something much stronger. He says against principalities and powers. So number one, it says principalities and powers. And that's everything from that I've studied says that what this describes is ranks of spirits. These are angels. Another part, it talks about these same denominations within God's ranks of beings and angels as well. So these principalities and powers, these governments, whatever they are, they represent the spiritual ideas behind the scene. Because it's not just Satan running around. And so when we say that Satan's testing me, what we really mean is that system. It might be demonic oppression. It may just be the world. It may just be the fact that we live in a fallen society. It may be the fact that our bodies are fallen in our minds, which we'll look at next week. But we are fighting against something that can be found everywhere. It's not Satan himself, but he has created a system in which he does not need to be everywhere. And you got to understand that when these angels that he has at his disposal fell with him, and we know that from several scriptures that he has angels. Jesus even talks about how the lake of fire was designed for Satan and his angels. And it speaks about that several times. So he has angels that assist him, fallen spirits, wicked spirits. But you have to understand that they may not all be on the same page. They may have fallen with him. Whether it's structured or not, all their purpose is to create chaos. And whether you deal with it personally, whether they attack, and I'm not going to get into demonology and all these other random things we could get into, but the spiritual world is a very real world, as real as this world is to us. We are spiritual beings. That is why we are the target. When God made man, he breathed into him and he became a living soul. It's the only part of his creation that is described as. Every other animal has the breath of life from general idea of life, a living being, something that moves and walks, but it does not have a consciousness. It was not created in the image of God. It doesn't have the same glory that man has. And we'll look at some of those things maybe later on more in depth, but Psalms clearly tells us that God created man just lower than the angels, and then he crowned him with glory and honor. And in Hebrews says that through Christ, we will reign not only over the physical world, but over everything. And Paul says we one day will judge angels. I don't know what every single one of those things mean. I couldn't tell you the full scope of what that entails. But I can tell you this, that is a whole lot bigger of a scope of authority that God is moving and creating and the end goal of for us than we think many times. We see our life, we see our jobs, we see our families, and that's part of it. And yet we don't seem to think beyond that. That one day we'll stand in the kingdom with our King who will be with us, as we talked about several weeks ago, and there is going to be all these things going on, and they're far beyond our scope. Judging angels, what does that even mean? I want to know. I want to study it more, but I don't think it really clearly defines everything for us, but it's so far beyond what we think. The spiritual world is the real world. What we are in now is 80 to 100 years of life as we pass through this time. And then it's over. And that's why he says, don't set your things on the world. Don't set your affection on things of the world. Set your affection on things above. He said, lay up for yourself treasures in heaven. Why? Because that's the real world. That's where we're headed. That's where we're going. And it's not just heaven up there. Remember, Revelations ends with a new heaven, new earth. Everything that people call heaven, the streets of gold, the street of gold, the pearl gates and everything, that's all part of the new Jerusalem that comes down out of heaven to a new earth. What's on that new earth? I don't know. What are we going to do there? I don't know, but I'm excited to get there. Because in that place, God will be with us. And we'll be doing things for eternity that we have no clue about right now. But that's the end goal. That's the real world. That's where we're headed. But in this world, we fight against things that we can't even see. And we don't even fully understand. And as we said last week, not understanding our enemy puts us at a disadvantage. And though we don't know how they work, where they move, and how they... a lot of stuff about it because we can't see it. We do know their purpose, and we do know their tactics, which we looked at. Division, problems, even sickness, even health sometimes, causing chaos in the world, causing wicked men to become more wicked. This is a system we're against. We're against people who want to create wars and rule in darkness of this age. Number 2, now I'll have to finish this up quick because we're late. But rulers of darkness of this age, I believe this begins to translate from not just what's behind the scenes of the spiritual world, but this begins to talk about those dark men, those secret societies, those people who conspiracy theorists love to make up names for. We don't know who they are, what they look like, what they want to do, but we do know what they want is the destruction mainly of mankind because they are wicked people doing the same thing that Satan does. They have taken part in his rebellion. They have wholeheartedly sold themselves to whatever he wants done. And we know from last week, there's only one thing the devil wants, which is to devour us. And so they are against us. They create wars. And if you ever, there's 100 documentaries you can get into. There's 100 people who want to talk to you your ear off for 12 hours a day about these kinds of theories about how it goes. But at the end of the day, all we need to know is that there are not only spirits, but there are people in this world who would love nothing more than to see half of the world be destroyed. They want it that way. They have always wanted it that way. That's why wars happen. Most of the time you look into a war and you find out it was really nothing more than somebody's ego or somebody making money on the back end of it or whatever it might be. And we have had lost men and women in wars over decades and centuries that had nothing more to do with anything but some king didn't like another king. And so he sends his pawns across the water wherever he goes and destroys the lives of men. Because Satan, out of everything, he hates mankind for whatever reason. Mainly, I believe, because of how God created us with glory, crowned with honor. And to be, as Hebrews says and Revelation shows, to be over everything at the end through Christ. It's always through Christ. It's not about us. It's not about mankind. It's always through Christ because he's the man. He's the perfect man. But we're fighting a war, not with physical weapons. And even though we need to use those sometimes to stop necessary evil or the evils that are out there, what's behind this is a system that resists the word of truth. And it's built on the idea of do as thou wilt. And you can just read the whole book of Judges to figure out how that goes. The whole theme of Judges is that every man did what was right in their own eyes, and you see the result, especially the last section of it. If you've ever read the book of Judges and you wonder why in the world the last couple chapters are in that book, it's because it's showing you what happens when man does what's right in his own heart. Because if you've never read the end of Judges, I'm just preparing you now, that's insane. It's crazy. It's wicked, it's vile, it is cruel. Everything in the end of the book of Judges is just putrid wickedness, but it's to show what happens when man does as he wants. That's the system we're against. That's in opposition to the word that says, do unto others as you would have done unto you. It's against the word that Jesus himself said in the night he went to be crucified, where he says, do unto each other like I have done for you, as he washes their feet and prepares to hang on a cross in a bloody mess for our sins and salvation. It's against that. It says, do what feels good. Do what's right for you. And because Satan knows, one, it's very attractive to say that, but it's also very destructive to do that. Because when we live for self, we destroy others around us. But when we live according to God's word, We stand against spiritual things. Here, the last part, spiritual things, spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places. The word host there simply means things, a whole conglomerate of things put together. Paul lumps everything together and basically says, we are fighting against overwhelming odds. That's what he's saying. These things are up here. And that's why he tells the Corinthians and Galatians, a couple other people, it's like, I wish I could tell you more, but you're all carnally minded. You're worried about this world. You're worried about who speaks well and who has riches and who has this and who has that and all this other stuff in this world. And he says, I can't tell you everything I need to tell you because you are carnal, he says. You're physically minded. Your brain is in the dirt of the earth instead of in heaven. And so he's trying to get these things across, that these odds are beyond us. But it is the system, the cosmos of Satan. It's driving this phenomenon, these things that are happening around us. It drives society. It influences cultures. It pushes men to want to be with men or women with women, or to confuse young minds to make a boy wish that he was a girl, or girl a boy, or somehow to be something in the middle somewhere. It destroys and it tears down and it pulls apart the fabric of what God designed in the first place, as far away from the path of righteousness, the original intent of the Creator, as possibly can be. That's what you see today. The society we have around us and the problems that are in it, if you want to boil it down to one thing, it is trying to pull us away as far as possible from the original intent of a man and a woman and his family living on the path of righteousness for God's sake. Right? As you guys will probably learn this more a little bit in Psalms 23. It's trying to rip that away in any way possible. Whether it started in the 60s and 70s with just people cheating on their spouses and divorce and adultery and fornication. And once that became the norm, then we moved into what we have today. All of those things are wrong. We like to stand and talk about how those people who talk about gender identities and homosexuality and all these other things, that they're the ones that are wrong. But we allowed these things to happen when we allowed people to just divorce over anything, to have lust in their life, pornography in the church. When we had any kind of sexual impurity that is allowed, it allows more later. And anybody who's ever been stuck in that sin and that problem, maybe you deal with it every week, you know that it never stops. It always is one thing, and then I want another thing here, and I want more and more and more. And the devil uses the same thing. We allow this, and then we allow that. And now we have churches today who preach that abortion's right, that homosexuality's right, that God just loves, and there's no criteria how we should live. It's the system that we live in. It's trying to pull us away from the very simple, very basic original intent. God made the world. He made man. And he said, man, you can't do this by yourself. He made woman. He put them together. And then they had a family. And he says, this is it. That's all you need to know. Live according to my words. Raise your family according to my word. And that's it. And that's the true desperation of our conflict. It should seem overwhelming to you. And it's not to say that... Well, I'll just say with this, that's what it is. That's where we're at. That's what we face. It's not just Satan running around out here with a pitchfork or whatever that people always try to picture him as. He's not God, he's not everywhere, but he has created a society based on a system that tries to draw us away from the path of righteousness into a path of destruction, of corruption. Any possible way he can corrupt. That's what he does. That's what his spirits do. That's what wicked men do. And it moves all the way down the line into our own neighborhood. And that person who's against me has all that behind them. And my job is not to punch him in the mouth or to hurt him or to do anything. But my job is to try whatever I can possibly do to win that soul to Christ. Because when they come to know Christ, then they can be restored. Anybody can be restored. Anyone in any place can be restored to Christ, restored to the image that God created in the first place, can be rescued out of the system, out of the matrix, as everybody likes to call it. We can do that. We have that power. But it's not in bombs and bullets and guns and everything else, but it's about the power of God's word, which is why it's so important, as we'll look at a little bit next week, or the next 2 weeks, why we have to know what the word says. Because we are not fighting things that we understand. We are fighting things that are well beyond us. And the only way we can win is through Christ. His blood, as it says in the end, they overcame by the blood of the Lamb and their testimonies. Your testimony comes from a life that has lived according to the Word of God. That's the only way we're going to do any of this. Our Heavenly Father, I thank you for everything you've done for us. I pray that you'd help us. I know today is very much a middle ground in these lessons that we're talking about. We are moving from one thing to another, and I pray that you'd help us understand that Satan extends his reach. The system he's created is well beyond himself. He is not like you at all. He is not all-powerful. He has no power over us except that which we give him. But we do face it every day, and I pray you'd strengthen us to help us to do well, to do better, to read your word, to be prepared against the methods, the schemes of the devil, the traps he sets for us, so we can keep ourselves from the lust of the flesh, the eyes, and the pride of life, so we can speak truth to these people, and not only speak it, but they can see it lived out every day, so that at some point, your Spirit can draw them, and we can be the first top-of-mind people that they see, and we can win them to you. Help us to remember every day is a witness. Every day is a war. But help us to stand in your power and in the power of your might, putting on the whole armor. And God, I thank you that you open our eyes to see these things. Help us to understand your word. Help us to get into it and read it this week. And we thank you for what you do. In the name of your Son, our glorious King, Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen. I appreciate your attention. I know we went a little bit over today, but I hope you get where we're going. Next week, we'll look at our third and probably worst enemy as we continue this series. You're dismissed. Have a good afternoon. Tonight is training union.